Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Good, good. It's great to be here. Really appreciate the invitation, the opportunity to be in conversation with all of you. My name's Tony Tolbert. This is my man, Adam Radinsky, my dear friend. I want to give a shout out to my mother. First and foremost, I want to honor and uplift her. At the risk of telling too much about her business, my mother turned 90 on April 2nd. Yeah. We had a wonderful, beautiful celebration, and every day is a blessing. So I invited my mom mainly because I love spending time with her, but also because having her here will keep me in check. I won't slip and drop some salty language that I might otherwise drop. So I want to be very respectful of all that. And then a shout out to Kelly Radinsky, Adam's wonderful wife, who's been so supportive of the whole project from the very start. So just wanted to get those in. So thank you all for being here. So just by way of quick background, Adam and I met, it'll be 40 years ago this coming fall, as first-year law students. And we became fast friends, in common interest in music and sports. And then we also realized early on that we had somewhat parallel life experiences. I grew up predominantly in the San Fernando Valley in the 1960s and 70s, when it was all white is over-inclusive, but darn near all white. We were literally entire San Fernando Valley at that point in time. And so that created a dynamic and a relationship to race and racial justice from a very early age. Adam grew up in Chicago, and grew up, and you can see he's white, as you can see, grew up in predominantly Black spaces, Black neighborhoods. So he also had a very up close and in-person experience with race and racial dynamics from a very early age. And once we connected on that, we realized, okay, there's some symbiosis here, if you will. And so that was back then. Fast forward to about 3 years ago, the wake of George Floyd and a lot of racial reckoning and things that were taking place in society, we were trying to figure out what to do. We both wanted to do something that was related to racial justice, and we decided to do a podcast on reparations. It felt like it was the right thing to do. It felt like it was the time to start talking more about it. It was starting to bubble up, but it was still not out in the mainstream. And we wanted it, reparations brings together so many issues that were important to us. And so we thought that's something that we could dig into. And that's what we've done. In a nutshell, we're two lawyers helping to make the case for reparations, one story at a time. That's what we're looking to do with each of our episodes. We've dropped 10 episodes now. We are about to be into the 11th episode, which will be a live show. We'll tell you more about that later. As far as we know, there are no other current reparations podcasts. There was a podcast called The Big Payback, and they had a limited run. I think it was six episodes. That was by design. And so as far as we know, we're the only reparations podcast out there. And as was mentioned, it's a hot topic. I mean, by a show of hands, how many of you have heard more about reparations in the last year or 2 years than you've had in your entire life? Everybody, right? So it's in the air, right? It's in the universe. Our format is relatively straightforward. We have been really fortunate to connect with people that are experts in the area in different facets, and they've been really generous with their time and energy and expertise until we've been able to bring them on and to dig into the work that they're doing and to their vision for how we could go about making reparations. The goals are very straightforward, which is to encourage and increase thought and discussion around the topic. And advocacy, in favor of reparations, and we'll get into some specific, concrete actions as we go in. But that's really the goal. It started out as a podcast, and now it has, blown up to where we're here talking to you folks today. A couple of months ago, we were helping to moderate a community discussion that Supervisor Holly Mitchell had as part of her Learning Exchange Initiative. We're going to be teaching a class at UCLA Law School on reparations this coming January. So a lot of unexpected things. I mean, we thought that things would come from this, but we couldn't have, diagrammed or predicted how that might come about. But it's all been really, really beautiful. And we've been open to possibility, open to suggestions. And it's, we're trying to, follow where, trying to lead, but also follow where, where we're being taken. So I'll stop there and to Adam, take it from you.
Thanks, Tony. And thanks all of you for having us. This is great. Like Tony said, our main goal with the podcast is to spark conversation and dialogue and thought about this topic that most of us, at least speaking for myself, up until a few years ago. I know a little bit about there had been, push for reparations right after the Civil War. That didn't go very far, right? And since then, there have been different movements come and gone, but nothing like we're seeing right now. And so we're very glad you're all here, and hopefully there could be a Q&A at the end of our presentation where we want to get all of your questions and hopefully get some dialogue started today. By the way, if I have to put my foot up, it's not because of white privilege. It's not because I think I'm in my living room. It's doctor's orders, so I may need to move my foot up to the chair. So what are we talking about when we talk about reparations for Black Americans? I think everybody has kind of a general sense, right? Like it is in a general sense a way of reckoning and paying back for centuries of atrocities, right? But what exactly are we talking about, and what would it look like? So as I think all of us know, in general, the US has had a long and horrifying history of just crimes against humanity. And where do you begin, right? With the way this continent was stolen from the people that were already here, by people who were kidnapped and tortured and brought over to be forced into labor to build this country. I mean, it's a very, very deep history. And of course, it hasn't ended. And, you have centuries of enslavement, you have the racial terror and so-called Jim Crow period, which was basically a period of terrorism and government-sanctioned violence for many decades. You now have the current era, right, of supposed color blindness, but still very heavy segregation, mass incarceration, police violence, and most of the big problems that we see in our history are still here, right? Because they've never been dealt with. They've never hardly even been talked about, really, despite the new laws popping up saying you can go to jail for talking about them in certain states. So as far as reparations, another piece of it, of course, is you have all the crimes against humanity, but then you also have the money, you have the wealth, you have the fact that enslaved people were an extremely large part of building the wealth of this extremely wealthy, the most wealthy state in the history of Earth, right? I mean, the whole economy was very much based on enslavement, and the U.S. has never done anything to even acknowledge, let alone repay any of that debt. So the tab has been run quite a bit large. And so when we talk about reparations, what we're talking about is making things right. And there are many different definitions of that. We'll get into a little bit of that today just to get you started. But basically, like what we were saying earlier, it starts with telling the truth, facing ourselves, reckoning with what we are, the air that we have all breathed growing up in America, which is racism. This country is all about race, contrary to what you may be hearing in the news. So the first step is telling the truth, facing up, and then we talk about making the repairs, right? There's a whole lot to be done, and any project, we're going to talk about the California Task Force, which is very exciting development. Even they, who did this huge project, they still had to narrow things down, pick what they're going to focus on. So there's every aspect of our society needs to be reshaped. We heard a mention of capitalism earlier. There's some whole new, fresh ways of looking at things that it's high time that we do. So we do want to talk about what that looks like. But first, maybe we'll take a look at the California Task Force.
Yeah, and as Adam mentioned, we're going to leave a lot of space for questions. So this will be part of the presentation, but the more interesting part will be conversation and dialogue. So yeah, as many of you or most of you probably know, a bill was passed a couple years ago, AB 3121, which was sponsored by then Assembly member Shirley Weber, who's now California Secretary of State, and it established a task force to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans here in California. An interim report was released last June, and final report was released just 2 weeks ago. It is almost 1,100 pages. No, I have not read every page. I'm not even gonna lie. I've looked at the executive summary, right? That's a good place to start, and we'll get into more of that. But it's chock full of just really compelling information. The task force did a tremendous job with the assistance of legislative staff from the state attorney general's office. Tons of research, analysis. They consulted with economic and policy experts in various areas, and they really investigated virtually every aspect of Black life that was impacted by slavery, then Jim Crow practices, here, and racial and ongoing and continuing racial discrimination. They calculated losses, because they had to do the hard work, right, of like figuring out, what does this amount to, right? But they're not talking in the abstract. So they actually calculated losses across these specific main categories: housing discrimination. So if you want to think in terms of redlining or restrictive covenants, so redlining where Black people were barred from actually getting loans to purchase homes in certain neighborhoods, because the fear was that if we moved in, that the quality, the value of the neighborhood would go down, right? There goes the neighborhood. So it was, this was, legitimate legal practices, wasn't against the law. You heard of restrictive covenants, where there are actually stipulations placed in deeds that prohibited landowners, property owners from selling their houses to Black people. And this was all, it wasn't even a secret. It wasn't, below the surface. It was right above, or right on and above the surface. We can talk in terms of health disparities, right? So if you want to look at the medical data in the disparate life expectancy, health outcomes between Black folk and white folks, policing practices and mass incarceration. Now that we have cell phones, we're able to see what Black people have known for forever, right? And I'm not going to cast all police as racist, but policing as a system is a racist system, rooted in a racist practice, rooted in slave patrols, tracking down runaway enslaved folks. So the fact that the history of that policing structure is playing out today, that shouldn't be surprising to anybody. Property takings, right? This is probably a lesser known area, but if for some of you that may be familiar with the old Sugar Hill neighborhood here in West Adams area, which was a prominent Black middle class, upper middle class, doctors, dentists, professionals, movie stars, thriving, folks were falling out, to use a very technical term. Folks were like doing their thing. And when city government decided where to situate the 10 freeway, they had some choices to make in terms of where to locate it. Surprise, surprise, cut right through the heart of Sugar Hill, which decimated that thriving Black community. Same things played out up in the Bay Area, where freeway was situated in West Oakland, Santa Monica as well. The 10 freeway was run through a predominantly Black neighborhood. We get that freeways need to go somewhere, but it seems overwhelmingly, not just in California, but across the country, they're situated in communities of color, right? Thriving communities of color. And then the last area where they focus on were business losses. So the task force came up after 2 years of meticulous research and really in-depth analysis, came up with a set of recommendations that they forwarded to the California legislature a couple of weeks ago. And this is a historic moment, right? We have never been in this moment before where there's been some actual concrete, let me back up. We've never been past 40 acres in a slave, 40 acres in a mule, past the point where we're this kind of development is taking place, where this kind of conversation and concrete recommendations that can be acted upon. And that's the moment that we're facing now. And that's the moment that we're going to, call on all of us to figure out how we can rally around it and bring some support to it.
Yeah, Tony's right. This is a very exciting moment. I can't remember the exact planning of today's event, but it is amazing timing that really just not even 2 weeks ago, the task force, after this monumental thing that they did, studying and documenting and getting more than 100 experts and hundreds of witnesses, they dropped this report at the doorstep of Sacramento. And so now it goes to the California legislature and governor. We just were reminded the other day that the official party platform of the Democrats in California includes reparations for Black Americans. So, okay, guys, now's the chance, right? This task force that was empowered. Usually when you hear the word task force, there's not a lot of task and not a lot of force. But these guys have a mandate. They did what they were supposed to do, and now it's up to the legislature. So we will talk to you guys in a little bit about kind of next steps and what we can all do to help make that happen. But it's a very exciting moment right now. And as we know, California very often sets the tone for the entire country. Policies and laws that start here more often than not set the trend nationally and can help get things going. So that makes it extra exciting. So like Tony said, this report, which you can get online, it's lengthy, but it is an incredible, riveting read. They go through, it's first of all like a history textbook of the real history of the real history of the United States, which is almost never told in any of the 50 states, in any of the school districts, colleges. I was a history major. I learned maybe 1% of what there was that we should know about what's happened in this country. And there's reasons for that. So what the task force is talking about is a plan, right? And they're saying it in Sacramento. It starts with an official apology. That really comes at the very beginning, okay? Like they did in South Africa, it has to be official. It's a ceremony, it's the government, and their plan is to have descendants of enslaved people be there in person to hear the apology as part of this event. And then they have detailed proposals. There's more than 140 different laws that they're recommending for consideration by Sacramento to be passed into law to reshape every aspect of life for Black Californians, and in many cases for all Californians. And so, you know, as Tony said, it goes through all different areas: education, housing, health, you know, addressing the 8-year discrepancy in life expectancy between Black and white people, and putting some numbers on the table for that. Now, you will be hearing, like we mentioned, NPR, reparations is all over the news. And all I want to say is, like, take with a grain of salt when you hear stuff about, oh, there's controversy and, oh, this is not likely to succeed. There's already a whole lot of propaganda going out ahead of the curve to kind of to rain on this. And there's a lot of obvious reasons for that. But you will be hearing a lot about money payments, because what the task force said was, we're not going to tell you how much money, we're not going to be specific, it's up to you, Sacramento. But here's some calculations. We've done some math, we've got some experts. Here's what it could look like. And like Tony said, they focused on just 5 areas out of all the areas of life where they felt you could quantify some numbers for Black Californians based on how many years you lived in the state of California. I know Mrs. Tolbert definitely is, no one has more years living in California within those that framework than she does. But it basically, housing goes from the 30s through the 70s. Policing is a little different. It's all very detailed. But they are talking about 5 areas with potential money payments. And you'll probably be hearing headlines about, oh, the maximum could be this or that. Yeah, that is a part of this. Yes, money is definitely a part of reparations. Absolutely. Keep in mind when you hear it in the news, what these guys did are very conservative estimations. They looked at all the barest number of categories. They kept things very, very minimal. And so you may hear some big numbers thrown around, but just know that this is barely scratching the surface. And also, this is just California we're talking about. We're not even talking about the whole country. So one other thing to mention is that eligibility, you know, who would be entitled to a check potentially? And there has been quite a lot. That got a lot of press the last few years. There was a very close vote in the task force of how to break it down. And what they eventually said was the people who would be entitled to money reparations would be the descendants of enslaved people who have lived in the state of California themselves, or people who are descended from a free Black person who was in the US before 1900. Not a lot of people in that category, but there definitely were some folks. So those are the 2, that's basically who would be eligible. So.
What's next, right? Yeah, where do we go from here? So the recommendations are out of the hands of the task force. The task force has done their job. Now in the hands of the legislature, state assembly and state senate. And we need strong support and pressure on the legislators to do the right thing, and the governor to actually adopt these recommendations and take some action. There's some stat floating around, this is on a national level, that we need 40% of white people to be on board with reparations in order for it to have a fighting chance. We're not there. We're not nearly there at this point in time. Even just in California, 54% of the entire state was disapproving of the task force. Didn't think that was needed, didn't think it was warranted, didn't think it was important. So it's vital, it's critical that we figure out strategies for putting pressure on the folks who now have the capability to move this forward. Somewhat cliche, but it's true, right? Reach out to your legislators, right? So what can you do in your individual capacity or collective capacity? Politicians respond to money and or pressure. If you have money, you know, consider using that to influence whoever you have access to. If you're willing to exert some political pressure, some political influence, again, either in your individual capacity or as a group, the more that these politicians understand that people are excited about this, that people are in favor of this, that people want to move forward with reparations. It's harder for them to say, this is a non-issue. Let me not take this seriously. Let me ignore this. You know, let me find some reason not to be brave and not to be bold. We need to make them feel that they can be bold, that we're supporting them, we're pushing them, we're pressing them. And I don't know your political status as an organization. I don't know if you all are able to take positions as a group. I don't even want to get into that because I might stir up a hornet's nest. But if you are able as an organization, great. And if not, then figure out how collectively, you know, in collaboration with others. And if you can't find someone else, then darn it, do it yourself, right? There's no time for us to be meek. Right? This is not the time for us not to be bold. Frederick Douglass said, if I can get it right, power conceives nothing without a demand. Right? Yeah, power conceives nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. So, now's the time. If we're serious about it, now's the time for us to figure out how to take some action. You can also do it in smaller spaces, right? Talk about it with your family. Talk about it with your neighbors. If you're part of a neighborhood association, if you're part of a book club, ask to assign the executive summary of the report as one of the readings, and go over that and have a discussion about it. We don't expect that everyone's going to agree on every single aspect of it. That's not the goal of it, right? But the goal is to move this forward and not to be thwarted by the naysayers who are going to say, oh, it's too expensive, or it's unfair. I didn't own any slaves. Yeah, I get that. Okay, but if you benefited from someone in your generational lineage who owned some slaves, if the state benefited from slaves who were here in California, right? And people want to act like slavery wasn't in California. California did enforce the Fugitive Slave Act, right? So slaves who escaped, found freedom supposedly from another state, came to California, could still be captured and re-enslaved. So California can't, wash its hands either of being complicit in that institution. But beyond that, just as mentioned, the Jim Crow, racial discrimination, ongoingly, there's wealth that's been created on the backs of Black people. Let me also digress. I'm going a little off script. We also recognize that Black folks aren't the only ones entitled to reparations, right? That's the crux of our podcast, Pay the Tab. But Asian American, Japanese Americans who were put in concentration camps in World War II got $20,000 per person, which was a pittance given what the damage that was done to them. So they're entitled to more reparations. Native Americans, who all this land was theirs, right? They're entitled to some reparations. So that the list is not short. But this is where we're digging in. We think this is the time to do it. So yeah, talk about it. Your social organizations, book clubs, your faith communities, get the dialogue going. Write about it. If you're a writer, write about it. Blog about it. Post it on. This looks like a social media group you guys are all doing. LinkedIn and Instagram, right? You do Instagram a little bit? A little bit? Yeah, a little bit. Right. So yeah, wherever you're out there, wherever you're speaking, make reparations be a part of what you're speaking. Let me just give you a quote. On the last episode, we had an economist, professor at UC Irvine School of Law, Marissa Barada, who studies. He's an expert on the racial wealth gap. And this is what she said about, where we as individuals can and should dig in. She said, quote, use your passion, use your skills. Everyone's fight is not the same. If you build homes, go build homes. If you are an artist, a poet who can inspire people, do that. If you can beautify spaces, go do that. If you can heal hearts, go be with the children. There really are so many places for people to act. It's not one thing, it's many things.
Well, this is only because I'm from Chicago, but yeah. And Tony said, if you have some money, go see your politician, make it happen. Now in Chicago, that means one thing. We're not talking about Chicago politics. There are many ways to influence our politicians here. And if you have resources and if you have money, of course, there are great ways to spend that. Advertising, PR, memes. I mean, this is all about getting the consciousness wrapped around half of what is going on around here, right? And like Tony said, particularly the focus is on white Americans, not just for, you know, the votes, and you don't have to get 100% of people on board, right, to make something happen, not at all. Yeah, well, one of the things that the task force is very interested in is in the endorsements. And like Tony was saying, if the, you know, Immaculate Heart or these particular organizations may or may not be able to or inclined to do that, but all of you may belong to other organizations as well. And endorsements is huge. Every little bit counts. I want to pass on just a little bit of wisdom. We had an amazing, some of you were there, a live interview with Robin D.G. Kelly, professor at UCLA, a writer, a thinker, one of the leaders in Black thought in America, really. And he generously shared his wisdom and his time with us. And, you know, one of the things he pointed out is that a lot of the current discussions about reparations are about, you know, money compensation, and they don't necessarily challenge the underlying structures of capitalism, racism, colonialism, and white supremacy, right? And so, as he says, what good is a check, even a big check, if you're still stuck in this system where you can't get ahead and you're still stuck, right? So he points out, and Tony and I 100% agree, that part of this has to be transforming our society and to use our imaginations a little bit. This is where art comes in terms of opening our minds a little bit to what things could look like, right? Instead of spending $200 billion a year on mass incarceration and over policing, which doesn't keep anybody safer, doesn't appear to do any good for anybody except the companies profiting off of it. What if we spent some of those billions on healthcare, on prevention, on drug treatment, on mental health services on demand? So many things we could do once we start rethinking. The California Task Force does an amazing job of using their imaginations and putting a lot of those proposals on paper. And that's part of what's on the doorstep of the legislature right now in Sacramento.
So we'll wrap up to talk about some of the spiritual dimensions of reparations, spiritual and personal. And hopefully this is consistent with the Immaculate Heart community's mission to create access to truth and justice and equity and peace, right, through spiritual development. We'd like to share reflections from a couple of our episodes. We had a young white woman named Morgan Curtis on, who had come into a large sum of family money that she was surprised to find out. She, in fact, discovered it accidentally, and much to her father's dismay. And then she also realized the legacy that money was rooted in, right? A legacy of extraction, a legacy of enslavement. And she initially, her first reaction was just to get as far away from the money as possible. This is dirty money. I don't want any of it. And then she realized that there was an opportunity for her to turn that money into something very useful and very positive. And so she's engaged in a personal campaign of reparations. Her name's Morgan Curtis, and this is what she had to share. Well, let me back up. The amount of money that she's given away to date is in excess of $600,000. So we're not talking about, you know, some chump change, right? We're talking about some real coin that she could have bought a house, bunch of houses, could have set up her retirement plan. But she said, no, this is money that I think that my ancestors who did these bad deeds, I think that they would actually rest better if I turn this into something more positive. And so this is what she had to say. She said, when we're talking about reparations, we're talking about arriving to a system in which everyone can thrive. We're talking about building a world in which everyone has the self-determination and safety and ability to lead peacefully and healthily. And we simply cannot get there without taking responsibility for the past and drastically shifting power and resources.
And just one more word from Professor Baradaran from UC Irvine Law School, who Tony mentioned a minute ago. She was talking about how we're kind of at this crossroads. Well, the planet is kind of at a crossroads, right? Did anyone feel the temperature lately? See the Pacific Ocean the other day? There's a lot of large things going on, and humanity has to make some choices. Part of what our crossroads is the racial crossroads in America right now. Wealth disparities have never been greater, and injustice is alive and well. So she's talking about how we have no choice but to come together right now. And she says, quote, "You don't need everybody. You just need a little bit, and then you start changing, you start breathing together. we're at a point when we have to start breathing together, or else we're all going down. We either start to understand that we're all connected, or we're just going to blow ourselves up.
Pretty much. Yeah. So can we just take a moment right now, just to take a deep breath together? One more deep breath. So I'll conclude with an invitation to also consider how we make reparations come alive in our own individual lives. I have to imagine that each one of us has caused harm, has damaged a relationship. And so, one of the things that we're taking on with some degree of trepidation and hesitation, but trying to step into is like, well, how do we make reparations personal, right? Where are the things that we can repair? Where we can do some healing in our own lives? And it doesn't necessarily mean reaching out to someone and apologizing, although it might be that. It doesn't necessarily mean forgiving someone or forgiving ourselves, but it might mean that. But we think that in order for reparations to really be realized and actualized on a statewide, national, global level, it needs to start at a very individual level. And so we just, offer as an invitation to think about over the weekend, where might be there some work for you to do to repair, and what might that look like, and what might come from that, even if you don't know where that might go, and even if it might feel a little scary or not something that you want to do, and invite you to give it some thought. So thank you for listening. We really appreciate the opportunity to be in conversation. Every time that Adam and I get a chance to speak about reparations, it just makes us that much more fired up that this is what we're supposed to be doing. So thank you for your listening. We're going to open up to questions. There are no questions that are off limits. Pam, I don't know if you want us to handle that. So see, there's a hand here and a hand there. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm a retired attorney from Evanston, Illinois. And as probably many of you know, it took many years for Evanston to pass a reparations ordinance, and it's been implemented for a couple of years, but it's been a slow go because it's problematic, implementing it. And it's been focused on housing quality. And so the reparations are focused on providing funds for African Americans to, either make down payments on homes, or it all has to go towards housing, improvements towards homes, etc. So I was interested in hearing your talk, and I'm a little overwhelmed that we're talking about statewide, program in a state as large as California, because I'm looking at a town that's under 80,000. I mean, I'd love to see it passed in California, but it's a big desire, big dream. Has there been any consideration of similar ordinances on a city, like the county of LA, or the city of LA, smaller chunks, I guess is what I'm asking.
Sure. Well, yes, and several other American cities have taken big steps. You may have heard about San Francisco,
Yeah.
Asheville, North Carolina. I think one of the things that Tony touched on that really needs to be said again is that reparations is a national issue. First and foremost, I'm sure you agree.
Yeah.
And you're right. The larger the group we're talking about, whether it's city, state, country, it gets that much more complicated and big. But I know some people, so I think short answer we would say about cities is that's great. You know, Evanston, Santa Monica, a number of cities have already passed some things, which are great. There's always going to be pushback. The higher the level, the more pushback there will be, the more sophisticated it will be. That's just really a call to action, if you want to look at it that way.
I just think of it as the way I look, I've been around this work, I'm old enough to think that, as things get more normalized, for lack of a better word, if people around the country say, oh, no, that town's doing it, things seem to be going okay, it didn't destroy that town, it starts getting a little more normalized, and I think that would be great, if the state of California passed something, you're right, I think it would be quite a statement to make for the other 49 states for sure, but I just was wondering if there was a thought that maybe we could do it either municipality by municipality or county by county.
I think the thought on that is kind of like, we don't want to take too much time as part of it. I think it's a very valid point. And there are many issues that you have to do that way.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Reparations is interesting because each city has a different unique history.
Yeah.
Pretty much every American city. You may have heard about Manhattan Beach a few years ago with the Bruce's Beach story that was in the news.
Yeah.
I mean, probably every American city has got some repairing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But I think the thought is, let's get to those. I mean, there's been a bill for going on 40 years in Congress. There used to be HR 40 to just do a task force and look at things, just to look at things.
Yeah.
And like Tony said, there was a majority of people opposed even looking at things in California when that started out. So it's all uphill. But I don't know, just me personally, I would say city stuff is great. And yes, it does build buzz and word of mouth.
But it's piecemeal.
But it's very piecemeal.
Yeah.
And even the states, it's like the states are kind of saying, yeah, we got our thing, but it's really it's our entire country. It's our government. It's our federal government.
If we could do it at the state level, I agree, it would be much cleaner and much more effective for sure. For sure.
So it seems to me that reparations, the word itself feels kind of thorny and it may feel thorny, right? And it seems like it could be a messaging issue, right? So my question is really, how will reparations benefit communities, right? Like what is reparations going to specifically do to benefit my community right here in LA or in Silver Lake, or what am I going to see? And what are my neighbors going to see and feel if reparations are given to Black Americans? What does that look like?
Yeah, just off the top, some examples would be better schooling, right? Better education in all neighborhoods, right? But particularly neighborhoods that have traditionally been underserved, right? Better access to just healthy living, right? Environmental racism is one of the targets that the task force looked at. How Black and brown communities are, historically have been the ones subjected to toxic dump sites, oil rigs, digging. And so, more parks, more green space, less food deserts, like where folks don't have to go out of their neighborhood to get healthy produce, healthy food, healthy living. So at a very, very foundational level, policing practices, right? So, we're going to get into this, and we'll put a spoiler alert. We're doing a live podcast show next Saturday at the Greenway Court Theater next to Fairfax High School with the formerly incarcerated woman who's going to talk about what it would look like to abolish the policing as we know. right? So yeah, would that have some transformative effect on Black communities? Most likely would, yeah. So those are just some off the top.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think the short answer is that reparations has to include restructuring our whole society. You're gonna add?
Yeah, and even how will it benefit white communities?
Thank you. That's a great point. That's what, yes. He's asking, yeah, he was asking, how does reparations benefit white people? That's a great question. And I think when we pan out and look at the big picture and where we put our resources in this country, nationally, we put our resources into the military, first and foremost. Large corporations, I mean, don't get me started on our priorities of what we do. But if we would put our priorities into each other, into correcting these grievous wrongs that have never even been, you're not allowed to talk. In some states, you're not allowed to talk about them right now. But like, we can't even look at it. We can't even look at it. We can't talk about it. And so it's a very good question. And yes, coming together benefits all of us. Many of the great thinkers of our time, Martin Luther King and many other people, talk a lot about how, you know, an injury to one is an injury to all. And that's absolutely valid. That's absolutely true. And so we need to, not just for the guilty conscience, potentially, although there's nothing wrong with that, we can run with that, like Morgan Curtis, our guest who gave away every penny of her family money. But like, there's so many other reasons as well. We're all connected, and because it's just outrageous what has gone on in this country without even being looked at.
Oh.
Okay, so who's next?
So the question here, Brandon Green, Mark.
Right now, I'm active with the hotel workers and hospitality workers. I'm also active with Dolores Mission, which is surrounded by projects, and the people are being evicted. And in order to be able to find rent and homes, they're going out into just horrendous places. And that's the biggest thing that's coming out of all of that, is that people can't find a place to rent. People can't find a place to buy. And my point is, it's generational wealth that people are looking for. And the history here, especially for the enslaved people, has been, as soon as you accumulate a little bit of generational wealth, there's a law or something that's put in to take it away from you. So it's generations of this wealth that has been denied. I heard another speaker before, a former senator, about the reparations. And he said, think big, because things are going to be denied. Might as well think big and land where you really want to land. And so going for the whole state of California, oh yeah, think big, because it's generational wealth. And at this point, there's, you know, with our talk concerning reparations, I think the answer to it has been the elimination of affirmative action, which is again a tool that has been used to be able to get to the point where we can get generational wealth again. And now that's been taken away also. So if anything, I think part of anti-racism, a spiritual transformation, which we do in our community, is to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, where are we thinking little? Where are we thinking stingy? Where are we thinking you can't do this? Because if anything, the God we say we follow is very generous and thinks very big. So why shouldn't we?
Just a quick comment on the idea of generational wealth. One of the state politicians, Steve Bradford, his line is that for people who say, well, you know, I didn't own any slaves myself, so why should I be on the book? And he said, if you can inherit generational wealth, then you can also inherit generational debt.
Hi. So I work in the environmental justice space. I'm very well familiar with campaigns and everything. So when you're talking about calling your legislators, so do you have an idea? There's going to be a couple of questions in this. Do you have any ideas of which legislators might carry certain bills? The timing for 2023, as you know, it's September 15th is when our legislative session closes, so it might be next year. So legislators Do you have any ideas of those? And then do you have any ideas of organizations? So for example, we're working on a massive statewide organization for health and safety setbacks between oil and gas and homes and schools and everything like that. And people, especially if they have grants, are very good at developing networks of like 150 or 200 organizations that work together that are statewide. So do you have something like that in the pipeline?
We do now. Yeah, we will.
Yeah, no, those are great ideas, and we have not yet, we're actually reaching out a bit to the task force and, yeah, the only name I think offhand, the brand new majority leader, Isaac Bryan, assembly member, we know he was there at the very beginning of this fight for the task force, and he's publicly expressed strong support. But I'm sure there are many others, and that's a very good, thank you for the, for the nudge, because we want to get that information out and available.
Thank you for sharing today. So a movement for reparations, to me, it seems like one side of it is the campaign for people's hearts and minds, right? To educate folks like you're doing in this space right now. And then to me, it seems like the other aspect would be a campaign for tangible policy change. We've talked about California, and I'm curious where it fits into the national discourse, given next year is probably going to be a really heated election cycle, right? With a lot of hot button issues coming up for our country, and this one being also a hot button issue. Where do you see it fitting? Are there any tangible policy initiatives at the federal level, or is this something where you're kind of really looking at the long game, because practically speaking, you have to?
Well, one thought real quick, and then where Tony has to say. One thing is for sure, is that you are going to be hearing, as we gear up for 2024, from the Democratic machine, if you will, the mainstream Democratic Party is, we don't want to do anything to mess around and see Trump again or lose this or that. And so we can't afford controversial things. So I'm just predicting, educated guess, that reparations is going to be, it's not going to be one of the key planks that everyone's going to rally around. You saw it 3 years ago, how that was. But there is this bill, I don't know the new number, HR 40, that's been around for 40 years, that is still there pending to have this kind of task force and analysis at the federal level. That's the main thing that I'm aware of that is still pending. There's not a big movement around it right now, but there is something in place. There is a structure there for basically doing what California is doing at the national level, right?
Yeah, so the only thing I would add to that is recently there's been, Representative Cory Bush out of Missouri has introduced a proposal that basically is to give more attention to HR 40, is to bring that back to life. HR 40 was introduced by House of Rep John Conyers out of Michigan. Like Adam said, going back 40 years. It was introduced every single year, never made it even out of the committee, right? And so the hope now is that with all the information and discussion around reparations, that it will at least make it out of committee where there could be some conversation and dialogue about it. And that's an opportunity, even if it doesn't ultimately pass, at least it elevates it to another level. And as everyone is acknowledging, that it needs to happen, ultimately needs to happen at the federal level. I mean, whatever's happening on the ground here, whatever Evanston does, whatever actual North Carolina does, whatever San Francisco does, is by nature going to be just a fractional, piece of the whole picture, right? And so we need, to keep putting pressure on, and that's where, notwithstanding elections, notwithstanding who doesn't get elected, notwithstanding, knuckleheads like Ron DeSantis, excuse me, if that's your candidate, but he's a knucklehead. Notwithstanding folks who want to deny the truth, folks who don't want us to be able to teach our kids the real history. Right, that's what we need to keep pushing, and the political process. It's a necessary evil, right? There's no getting around. We're gonna have to work through and with. But part of that is making them respond to what is the will of the people. That there needs to be enough collective will for politicians to say, it's more harmful for me to stand against this than it is for me to move with it. Even if I don't feel it in my soul, I need to do this because it's the politically right thing to do.
And you saw some of that in the 2020 debates. The Democrats, it was uncomfortable if you were watching those live debates where they were Marianne Williamson put everybody on the spot. And they were like, yeah, okay, reparations, yeah, that sounds good. In the last 3 years, though, we've been seeing poll numbers. 4 years ago, there was maybe single digits, 5% of white Americans maybe supported reparations. There's been a steady increase, and now I think it's something like 25, 26%. Young white people, over 50% of young white people support reparations now. Something like 54% of millennial white people. So there has been, the consciousness is raising. And you know, it's a great time. That's when you can get a little bit more leverage with your communications. We may be nearing a tipping point in California.
Hi, thank you. It's kind of a Monty Python now for something different, but I'm coming from alternative health, wellness works, alive and well for 40 years. And at very grassroots, small scale. But back in 1984, the idea that your health and stress is related, no one even comprehended that they had stress. Okay, where are we today? We are overwhelmed and we're in denial that we're in stress. We know we're in stress, but we don't know how to begin. I heard this woman being interviewed on NPR about 4 weeks ago, Tricia Hershey. And she has founded the NAPS ministry. And her book is called Rest is Resistance, a
She's
manifesto. And she completely, there's a deck of cards, 50 cards, note every day. And she relates it to reparations. And she makes a whole case for all of us that we have been brainwashed to be productive. And our inner voices make us feel guilty when we want to rest or take a nap. We can't turn our minds off. So I just want to put that in there. I hope you'd interview her.
We reached out.
Oh, great. Oh, great.
We've got some other guests to talk about sleep and reparations, though. It's a very interesting topic.
Okay, fabulous.
Thank you.
Two things. One is, how do we get a copy of the executive summary of the report? Okay, because I think we need to have that material. Second thing is, when you talk about reparations, you're talking about the radical Republicans' deepest fear. Them brown, black folks want to come and take everything away from me. So somebody has got to get to an ad agency, to some smart kids, and really look at a way to turn around this message and to say, these are the benefits. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be feeding into the fuel of all of this rather than defuncting it and moving it around. We've got to change the archetype with this. I know I just came back from Pine Ridge Reservation and working with Native people. And what I've been saying is, if my ancestors had been able to see Native people as sages instead of savages, this earth would be in a completely different place. It's just a way to shift thinking. We've got to come up with something that does this around reparations. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We agree that's powerful messaging, yes. And we'll send the link to the executive summary to Pammy, if that's okay. We'll send it to you, send it out to the group. Great, thank you. We'll include in that of the information about our upcoming live show. As I mentioned, it's a week from tomorrow.
July 22nd, there's going to be live spoken word poetry and an amazing, riveting guest who's a filmmaker, writer, and formerly incarcerated woman with some amazing ideas. So hope you can come out and join us.
7 p.m. at Greenway Court Theater, Fairfax High School.
Saturday, July 22nd. It's connected to Fairfax High. It's right in the middle of LA.
We have no shame about promoting the podcast, so come on out, please. There's quick questions here, a question here.
I'm guessing that one of the main pushbacks you might get for white people is, I didn't do it. And then once we start how do we stop it from getting out of control? How do we control it? Can you share with us some good responses to those two things?
There's a lot to say. Okay, the last thing you said, I think is very important, sort of like a Pandora's box. I think that's how racism has been treated since well before the Civil War, right? Like, we can't even begin to go there because how are we ever gonna, we've done so much and we keep doing it, you know? So anyway, as far as the first thing you said, I think we do need to be very focused on the messaging about, this is not about individual people, what they or their ancestors did. This is about the US government, the US government. You don't need to look any further than that. There's state governments, there's plenty of private people and all that, but it's mainly the government that we're talking about. Our tax dollars, our elected officials had condoned slavery, put it into law for centuries, right? Our Constitution is based on slavery. The founding fathers, half of them owned enslaved people, right? So it's the federal government. It's not about individuals, and that is used. And most of these things, keep in mind, people do have ideas, but these kind of memes get put out there, very consciously, and people pick up on what resonates. So anyway, I don't know if you want to add.
No, I mean, it's that, but also, and I'm drawing a blank on an example, but it's not as if every governmental program has some direct connection to someone having had done something, wrong in the past, right? And so, but for whatever reason, when it comes to focusing on reparations for Black people, now we want to get very granular. Well, okay, well, hang on, like, I didn't have any slaves, or my grandparents didn't have any slaves. Okay, we're not saying every white person is complicit necessarily, but as Adam mentioned, the government and the structure of it is what we're talking. The foundational, right, is what we're talking about. And so where that's where the answer needs to be. That's where the recourse is. And we as a society, we make investments in things that we don't necessarily have any connection to, right? We make investments in natural parks, even though you may hate the outdoors. You look like an outdoors got to do. So I'm not talking about you personally, but someone may hate the outdoors, but we still believe that it's nice to have national parks, right? People can go and enjoy the outdoors. So it's very rich when people want to now get very granular and focus on why should we, and what's the justification, and I wasn't complicit in that. It's like, damn all that, excuse me, darn all that.
One other thing about talking to white people is that it's also not just about enslavement. My dad bought a house in the 1960s. He's a Jewish guy, wasn't facing a whole lot of anti-Semitism at that point. He was a white guy, and more importantly, and had no problem buying a house, right? Tony's family, there's a very interesting story there about, having difficulty being able to buy a house in various parts of Los Angeles. So right there, it's the benefits. We talked about the generational wealth, the white privilege that all of us are just now beginning to learn about. I don't pretend to know squat about this. It is a learning process for all of us, right? And people saying that they're getting very narrow, just looking at, their ancestors who might have owned enslaved people. But we have all, as white people, benefited tremendously, some more than others, and certainly no one benefited as much as the very wealthy and all of that, right? But just it's set up it's a very genius system to keep things rolling for the public.
I saw was the stand. To do it piecemeal, to me, is kind of a slow way or a small thing to do, because there really wasn't that many Black folks in California until after 1930, and they came here for the war, right? War effort. So if it's after 1930, any Blacks were here previously to 1930, how does that affect them? And then I think if you just say California and do this California, it's kind of small thing. It's small because this is the universal thing. I'm from Minneapolis. I mean, they hung people in Mankato. They hung people in Duluth. How did that affect? Even if it affected the individuals, how does it affect our thinking? How does it affect the thinking of those people in Minneapolis when growing up? So that's all I have.
Yeah, so we're hoping that, as California has done in many areas, we'll lead the way, right? That California can put a stake in the ground and say, yeah, this is important. We're gonna make a commitment to this. That will give some other states encouragement and embolden to do that.
Well, that was just, if you mentioned the 30s, that was just about housing discrimination specifically and how that was set up. That's not, they're not limiting reparations to people after 1930. For housing stuff?
Yeah, I think maybe just for housing, but for other harms, I think it goes. Yeah,
For California?
yeah, my understanding is that it's any black person, any black Californian who's a descendant of an enslaved person or a descendant of a freed black person prior to the end of the 19th century. But yeah, but the 1930s was just the housing piece. They figured out the housing gap from 1933 to 1977. They pegged it at about $5,000 per year. So black California who had a house at that period of time, for that entire period of time, that would be about $220,000 payout, but just for the housing piece. But there are other areas that the task force went into that people could receive compensation for that don't relate to housing. So I don't know if that clarifies it or not, but.
Yeah, mass incarceration was later. And keep in mind, this is very limited. They picked a few topics, they dug deep. This is where they can put numbers on it. So they're not pretending for this to be everything.
It's Judy Vaughn, Alexandria House. One of the things that Alexandria House does is participate with the Poor People's Movement, and one of their pillars is to address the right-wing fascist claim on Christianity and defining what the moral narrative is. So I know there's a number of folks here from different faith communities, definitely Immaculate Heart, the Givord Center. It's, you ask what the benefit is to really speak clearly, reclaiming the moral narrative, because every major religious tradition, the tradition, not necessarily the institution, speaks about the humanity and the shared humanity and however you define the spirit believes in, that we have to do this. And it's in keeping with every deepest part of ourselves and what the spirit of life and justice is calling us to do. And so maybe part of the mobilization is to have those of us who come out of a faith tradition gather together and make a strong stance that this is the right thing to do and the moral thing to do and the human thing to do. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Sarah. You mentioned that you are a history professor and that you didn't know or you hadn't heard much about some of these issues when you were in your education process. I think the difficulty for me is when I was in school, I had the same experience. I studied anthropology at UC Long Beach, and they specifically did not have an Africana studies class, which I thought was very interesting. And then when I sought at looking for a class, they said, oh, well, they have an Africana studies separately. So then I took that class and I took that program, and I learned quite a lot about, African traditions and the Odu Ifa and other sacred texts that teach about the culture of that area. And what I thought was really interesting was that so much of American society doesn't teach African traditions, and they're so separated from their culture, more so than money or the loss of generational wealth, the loss of a connection to a history, the loss of a connection to a family. We know what our origins are. Most people can say, oh, I'm Irish, I'm Spanish, I'm these other things. But all most African people can do, or of African descent, is say, I'm from Africa originally, or I have that connection. So I think this process could be very helped if it was more about the education of the individual and bringing people up on why it's important, how it can improve situations. And specifically, you know, like what this individual said about the term reparations being kind of triggering for some individuals. If they broke down the policies, so then you learn more about the policies. How do we bring people to the knowledge of the policies so that people become more educated on not only the issues, but the history and how it's affecting them and how their education has been limited from their own histories to like, and even the modern like American histories? How do we bring that information to the average person?
That's a really important point about education. I have a small theory on why the word reparations is triggering or whatever the word you use, because it's about Black people. I think that's why, you know, that when it comes to, there are many things that cause, you know, inaction and pushback, but I would say looking at our history, never more so than we're talking about doing anything for Black Americans. That's the trigger right there.
I don't know, sorry. I don't know specifically which policies are under the umbrella term of reparations. Because when you hear reparations, you hear financial discourse. So you hear this kind of, oh, we're going to be paying out X amount of money to people that can claim ancestry to enslaved individuals. Okay, but there's more to it than that, according to the housing initiatives and things like that. I haven't even heard of any of these policies specific by number or other things. I think it was mentioned that maybe we should get that information out, but how do we disseminate that information?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think, and that maybe not discussed so widely, but I think there needs to be a really aggressive educational campaign, both for the general public, right, but also to then translate down to young folks, and have this be embedded in schools, right? I mean, this is, you know, our kids are in schools all day, every day for the most part, right? That's where they're getting a lot of their information if they're not getting it at the home. What kind of information is being discussed in schools? What's allowed to be discussed in schools, right? So I think the educational campaign is twofold for us to become more educated, and then to figure out how do we translate that to you know, junior high, high school, elementary, you know, school kids, and certainly in the colleges and universities.
Hi, I just want to say reparations, decolonizations, anti-police, these are all terms that make us feel uncomfortable, people old like me. But I was really encouraged by the statistic you claimed that over 25% of younger Gen X millennial, they agree with reparations. So when we're polite, we lose our bodily autonomy, we lose textbooks in the schools. And this is what's happening. We need to be bold. And I appreciate what you said. I didn't get your name in purple. We need to be bold and we need to go. And if they don't like the language, well, we can talk about why it is, but it's decarceral, it's police abolition, and it's reparations. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. And when people are uncomfortable, we want to ask them, what is it about this that's making you uncomfortable? Let's look at that. Let's break that down. What's that rooted in?
And it is uncomfortable, right? I think that's when we know we're onto something worth talking about, when it's not just a soundbite, we can all nod our heads and agree, and all of our friends and relatives agree, you know, this is uncomfortable, and it should be. It's got to be uncomfortable. It's about time it wasn't.
Well, you know, as the Immaculate Heart community, we want to change systemic things for people. And so we are so grateful for you being here and raising this subject to us and educating us all on things. My point is, I think our foundational documents are a lie. All men are created equal. Hello? No, only white men. What about women? We're not created equal, but really in the eyes of God, we are all equal. We are all one. And when one suffers, we all suffer. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, thank you. And the corollary is that when some folks rise, we all rise, right? I mean, we are, you know, inextricably connected, right? As much as folks might want to deny that and escape that and run away from that and build communities where they can have walls and fortresses and be, you know, barred off, you know, walled off from people, we are all connected. We are all breathing together. And when we can realize that and tap into that and understand that that person's suffering is my suffering, right? And I have a responsibility. If I can do something to help end or alleviate their suffering, then I should do something if I can.
And all of our conversation now, which we're talking about the changing of hearts and minds, it means education and self-education, not waiting for someone to educate us and to taboo feed us. And I think that's where the anti-racism training is so important, so that we get from the place of, oh, well, I got mine, to the place where Rabbi Herschel tells us that some are guilty, but all are responsible. And just like some people can get excited about anime and look at the whole universe of anime and are looking for it and can tell you what they wear and everything. My generation, some of us are and still are Trekkies, and we have a whole canon. And it wasn't too hard for us to get on, the internet to figure this all out, to get that passion in everyone of getting from, well, I didn't know about that, to I didn't know about that, and I am going to know about it, and I am going to learn, and I am going to research, and I am going to do something.
And I'm gonna share that information.
Yes.